quick story. One time I was running these retail stores, and I went and I was visiting a store, and I can even picture the exact store I was in. And then I had, some fire somewhere, probably an employee issue. And, but, I was trying to balance talking with the staff and taking care of this problem. And after I left, the store manager called me and she said, so-and-so was devastated. I'm like, what? And she goes, yeah, they're just devastated. She had all of these things she wanted to share with you. And she just didn't feel you gave her the time. Right. And so my first reaction, right, is to be in defense. Well, I've got a lot of problems. I'm in charge of a lot of things. Right. But, right, I think true leadership is how I can make any person feel when I'm with them. And I think when I'm making sure that I am present, that I'm engaged, and I am listening, that maybe sure I couldn't maybe give her an hour. But I think what she was really upset with, right, is that I just did not give her the moment that she deserved. And a lot of times we think leadership lessons, people think of the big running an organization and 5-year plan and all that. I think, real leadership happens in the moment, and I think it's won or lost right there.
What if is a question everybody asks themselves probably more than once in their life, especially as we get a bit older and our careers have more stories behind them. But for most leaders, when we ask what if, it's a backward-looking question. What if I'd said this instead of that? What if I'd taken the other path instead of this one? What if they had said yes or no instead of no or yes? And so on and so forth. My guest today has a powerful reframe of this question that's worth hearing. His name is Doug Fleener. He's a personal advisor for growth and change, the author of the book Start with What If, and creator of the What If Rule, a simple approach that he uses to help people create immediate change and growth in everyday moments. So it's fair to say his work is of interest to anyone wishing to lead with integrity in those very everyday moments. We'll also be talking about the weekly questions to ask yourself for that all-important change and growth, the implications all of this has for your leadership, as well as Doug's own journey, his career, his experiences as an author, as a leader, and how all of this has shaped what he does today and his views on decision-making, perspective, fate even, his what-if rule itself, and more. As usual, I encourage you, stick around to the end of the episode for more information about Doug, this week's guest, his book, and where to find him. And a final thought for you before we get Doug on the show and begin the episode properly. Most technical leaders are promoted because of what they know. Then they're left, abandoned even, to figure out leadership on their own. Leading with Integrity and my Integrity Leaders community gives those new and emerging technical leaders the real-world guidance, a peer community, and practical tools that they need to lead with confidence instead of guessing their way through it all. If that sounds like something you'd like to learn more about, then pay a visit to leadingwithintegrity.co.uk or drop me a message on LinkedIn. Details for both of those are in the show notes, as always. And I hope to be welcoming you aboard our virtual starship of leadership very soon.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Doug, welcome to Leading with Integrity. Great to have you on the show today.
David, awesome to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, awesome to have you. It's a good word. I like it. So, to start us off, over to you. Tell us a bit about your background, your career so far, what you do today, and why.
Well, let's see. I always joke that my highlight was I was wittiest of my senior class and could have been voted least likely to succeed. And, so my life fell apart when I was about 28 years old, had to rebuild it. Went to work for a company, the Sharper Image, and then I went to work for Bose Corporation, and it was at Bose. I was director of retail, and I took them from one store to 100 stores, from about 5 of us to over 1,000 people. And it's really where that is really where my leadership journey and learning. We were just talking that, one of the wonderful things on podcast is you get to learn from all these people. And when I started really on my leadership journey, there were no podcasts. You went to Barnes and Noble and you stood in the leadership section and stared at the covers. So we had to work a lot harder back then. Joking. So, and then I left there in 2001 and went out and really focused on a lot of frontline leadership, a lot of executive leadership also, and around retail and customer experience. And so then I took a little break. I did that for like 15 years and then took a little break to be the CEO of a national company. One of my clients asked me to run it for him. And, it was interesting being in, 15 years of telling others how to do it and then go back into doing it. And, right, I learned a lot. And then so about the last 3 or 4 years, I've been back working, just published a new book, which I know we'll talk about. And again, working with a lot of people on creating immediate change in leaders.
Lovely. Yeah, I love the language you use there. I took a little break to go and head up a national company, as you do.
It's funny because I didn't actually want to work for the guy, and but it really worked out because what I was doing would have collapsed during the pandemic. So sometimes you luck out into right decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us a bit about the book then.
Well, like I say, this is my 3rd book, and this is it Start with What If, weekly questions to spark immediate change and growth. And, the journey to write a book is kind of interesting because sometimes what happened, and this happened to me, is the book I set out to write is not the book I necessarily wrote. And so 2 years ago, I wrote a book called The Day Makes the Year Makes a Life, and it's really about creating success on a daily basis. I've been in recovery from drug addiction and alcohol for 39 years. So I took a lot of what I had learned in recovery and put it into creating success on a daily basis in that book. And so when I went to write this book, I started taking a look back and saying, what are the threads? What connected when change and growth happened in my life? Sometime huge, like when I decided to quit using drugs and alcohol, or small changes in, say, my relationships at home or with employees or what have you. And so I spent time really kind of analyzing and looking at what was the common denominator. And what I end up coming up with is that every one of those had some form of an interruption, something in the moment that broke my habit, my reaction, the story I told myself. And so I started to really see the power of an interruption and just breaking that automatic response. And as I then looked at it, I was able to kind of break it down into a very simple framework called the what if rule. And it's easy. It's pause, question, go. And so we can talk around that, right? But what I realized is that question, a lot of people talk about the questions you can ask yourself. For me, what I wanted is to look at what is a way to ask yourself or people you lead in a question in a way that helps you look forward, not backwards, and helps you create new perspectives and options. And so the reason I say, you didn't write the book I planned to. So I planned to write this whole book around really the what if rule. And then I realized, if something's really going to be usable, it shouldn't take 250 pages to tell you about it. So instead, I wrote a chapter about it and then wrote the rest of the book with questions and how to apply it in your weekly and daily life.
Okay. I think there's a metaphor for career journeys and probably for life as a whole there as well, isn't it? That you never end up with the one you set out to have. Maybe some people do in their career, I don't know. But yeah, certainly not been my experience either.
Oh, I think if you had asked me about where I wanted to go, I wouldn't be sitting here today, right?
Well,
because so many of my decisions were the wrong decisions, but fate took me an opportunity, and some of the people around me, the leaders I worked for, really helped me get to where I was going, not knowing that's where I wanted to go.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so the kind of the interrupting the patterns, the thought processes is something I've heard before about in the context of like conflict resolution and managing conflict, difficult conversations in the workplace. Like do something. It sounds cliche, doesn't it? Do something unexpected. Expect the unexpected. Those kind of not that helpful phrases. But it's interesting to hear you talk about it in this kind of context and in this sort of framework and just for general leadership as well. So maybe you could expand on the what if rule a little bit more. Someone in the audience wants to start using this. How can they do that? Like in everyday life, in their leadership, in, relationships, maybe? You tell me.
Sure, absolutely. So it's 3 steps. And the first is just a pause. Right. And so it's about, like you say, that interruption. But again, what it's really given you an opportunity to do, and we'll especially talk in leadership terms, is that, as leaders, we're constantly working on so many different things at once. We're putting out fires, knocking out things. And so one of the things that happens is, we're built to think fast, act quick. And what happens is your normal response may apply at that moment, or you could be missing an incredible opportunity. So just by breaking the pattern of a pause can really make just a huge difference. Right. So first it's that stop, that interruption, that pause. And then the second part is the question or the what if. And so, most people, when we think about what if questions, we use them looking backwards with regret. What if I hadn't gone into that line of work? What if I hadn't gotten married? What if all these things, I hadn't taken that job? And, instead, we use what if questions to take the moment and then look forward. And I like to always think of it like, whatever you have in front of you, right? Normally, we're only looking at the one right in front of us. But what if there's other things I'm not seeing here? What if this is a issue that actually could make us better, not weaker? I mean, you can just have all these different ways. And so what it allows me to do is to change my perspective and also create new options. But the third step, and I think the key is, and there's a whole lot of stuff right out around there around, stopping and pausing or mindset. But one of the things I found is that the third step is the most important. As simple as it sounds, is the third step is go. Right? Because people talk about mind shifts changes, and then they just go back to what they were doing. Right? So the third step is go. I like to always say that, knowledge without application has no value. Right? A new perspective without application changes nothing. And so those are really the 3 steps. And so to your point is how can it be applied? It can really be applied in any situation. And I think it's very useful when we are working with employees, because a lot of times when a staff comes to us, we have just a natural reaction, especially if we're in the middle of something. And I think if you just pause and ask, well, what if this is an incredible teaching opportunity versus just answering a question? Or, what if Dave really needs my time at this moment? And so really just looking at each moment. And you can also do it on a daily basis. I think one of the most important what if moments are at first thing in the morning, as you pause and then look at what if your day will be and then execute the day.
There's loads in there that I really want to unpack, and I'll probably get carried away and forget half of them. But I'll start with what I can remember now, and then if I forget them, I do. But So the pause concept I really like. It's something I've heard in a different context. So one example that jumps to mind immediately was way back in the first year of the podcast. I was talking to an ex-firefighter. He was talking about like the overwhelm that happens in those really like tense, dangerous situations. And so he talked about the value of that pause in the context of like taking a breath, appreciating the full situation before you rush into making a decision. And I think it's a similar thing here, isn't it? Perhaps when the stakes are lower, but I don't think that changes the value of it. And then the second thing, before I forget, is the follow through, like the execution. And I think, again, it's a theme that comes up time and time again in leadership, where we get kind of in our own heads, we get in that thought loop and it becomes a loop. And it's almost like a time loop, isn't it? Where we're just repeating the same thought over and over and never actually doing anything about it. So that execution, that follow up, follow through, actually do what you said you were going to do, you know, whether it's acting on a bit of staff feedback or it's actually doing something to achieve a strategy or a goal or a vision or whatever other grand words you've got around it. It's so important. And yet it's that thing that so many leaders, either they don't get far enough to do it or they're always just holding out for that sort of perfect solution before they act. And so what inevitably happens is they just don't act.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, if we just go back to that pause for a minute, right? It's we're so distracted so much today, right? And there's just so much asked of us. I was talking with someone the other day and was thinking about like when my father, who ran a clothing store chain, when he worked, right? When he walked out, I mean, he didn't have email, right? The big one was if FedEx just showed up, and that was even probably before FedEx. Right. So, the way that the number of things that he had to deal with on a daily basis was so much smaller than what we have today. I mean, even, email and Slack, right? When they're using both, that just doubles, right? And so there's so much. So I think what happens is our mind, right, for survival might be a heavier word, but for us to really get through the day, we stack things up, right? Well, I've seen this. Oh, I'll do this. I've seen this. I do that. And that's where I think there is, really strong leaders can really slow it down. There's a movie, I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's on American football, called Draft Day. Has Kevin Costner, and he's the general manager of a team, and he talks about quarterbacks, and he actually is talking about Joe Montana, and he actually says the great ones can slow it down. And he uses an example that they're in the huddle, they're marching down the field at the end of a Super Bowl, and Montana goes, "Hey, is that John Candy up in the stands?" And so he's able to be totally in the moment, but slow it down so much that he could see the things around him that actually relaxed his rest of his team, and they went on to win. So I think that pause is that importance of slowing down, and I think where that really happens is, we accidentally as leaders can disenfranchise our employees a little bit when, that moment we have with them for us is a moment, but for them, it could be a really critical point. So I think that pausing and just get in the habit of it can really increase your presence. So, to me, that's just, it's so much more important, right? And you said one other thing you said is right. It's when we think of leadership, I think we have this tendency to think of these big, huge, lightning bolt moments, right? But great leadership and success is really just happening from moment to moment. And that's where I think the what if rule can definitely help.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. It's one of those things, isn't it? And just thinking about this in terms of like decision making as well, and the day to day, and that kind of misunderstanding, I think, around what being decisive looks like. I think maybe Hollywood has a lot to answer for in this. I don't know. Maybe I'm being unfair to them, but there's this sort of perception, isn't there, that being decisive means making decisions quickly at like the drop of a pin or a hat, or whatever the phrase is. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think there is value especially, as you say, as the world and as technology gets increasingly complicated and there's so many different things and noises and voices that we've got to listen to, being able to just, okay, actually just take the time, consider the information you have, assess whether that's enough information to actually make an informed decision or not. And then when you get to that point, make an informed decision instead of just make a decision quickly. That's the only metric. The faster I do it, the better the decision is kind of that false logic, isn't it? And I think,
it really is. And I think, I was going to say what it made me realize is, right, what you were just saying is that so often the objective, it can almost be as a decision made. Versus really the objective should be the creating the greatest opportunity out of the decision that needs made.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think, the only other thing I was going to add was when speed of decision making is your priority, you almost stop looking at information. You just do it on gut instinct or whatever, or just, I don't know, throw darts at the board and where it lands is your decision. Like,
done.
Yeah, exactly. But at least it's done. I can tick it off now. I've made a decision. I'm a good leader. Yeah. I think I don't have the data on it, but I feel like a lot of businesses have gone really badly wrong because of this mindset.
Yeah, and that word opportunity, I love that word only because, I think there's just always so much more opportunity before us. If that is when we go in and look for it. And some of the best leaders, I've worked for, I think that was really their strength, is what was seemed maybe the mundane to many people was that fine detail of where opportunity lies. And you don't see it if you don't look for it.
Absolutely. And it does take a bit of courage, I think, especially when it's not the done thing, to be able to just sit there in silence in a meeting room, for example, when everyone else around you is being noisy. It does take courage to say, I don't think we know enough to make this decision yet. And I can see that getting quite tense and stressful in certain environments.
Yeah. Although again, I think it's a great skill if you can teach those in a meeting. I mean, you could, what if there's 4 things here that we're not prioritizing enough? I mean, again, something as simple as that just gets everyone to kind of look at it from something a little bit different.
Indeed. Tell us a bit about the perspective advantage. What is it? How does it work? How does it benefit organizations?
Yeah, I think the perspective advantage is really that, and it kind of just follows right up with what we were talking about, is that when a leader in an organization has the ability to see different perspectives, I think it really, again, opens up where there might be, when we see this perspective, there's opportunities to potentially elevate our customer experience, our customer service of when we're in to move into, a different area. And I think it's when you constantly are looking for a different perspective, again, I think it definitely gives you a real advantage. And one of the things that in my book is we focus a lot on these everyday things, very small things in our life, because the what if rule and start with what if are all really across all parts of our lives, right? Not just business, not work. Because I think not just home, right? Because we're the same person everywhere, right? So if we can learn a skill in one part of that life, we can carry it into another part of our life. And so I think it's about really, like any skill, you have to practice it. And when you can practice it, you can elevate it, you can mature it. And then I think that's where, again, you can come in. And I believe that leaders, individuals, organizations that look for more perspectives have a true advantage.
Taking it literally and going back again to that decision-making point, if you only consider one or two options, one or two perspectives, your decision isn't going to be as good, is it? Because you might have missed the right choice because you just stopped at the first one or whatever. So I can see like in a literal logical sense, that makes perfect sense. And I think there's also maybe something here about sort of the empathy and emotional intelligence aspect of leadership and being able to like put yourself in the shoes of others, see from that perspective, understand what they're going through perhaps before you make a leadership decision that might impact their job or their life even. I don't think that's too much of an exaggeration these days, is it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, and I think especially when it involves the customer experience or an employee experience, it's so important to see that perspective from others. And back when and this is where I learned a little bit of that lesson. Back when we started these Bose stores very early on, we only had a few stores, and I was running one in the middle of nowhere, Alabama, and this customer walked in with a Bose product to return, and they had bought it from a different channel of ours, direct channel, but a different channel. And I remember just saying to them, well, I'm sorry, I can't help you. That's a different channel. You'll have to just call the 800 number and they'll take care of you. And I'll never forget, the guy walked outside and I could see him through the window, and he just turned around and he looked at the name on the front of the store, right? He had a Bose product at a Bose store, and I was telling him to call a different Bose place, right? And so I think that happens a lot in organizations where we don't see what we're asking the customer to do or handle things from their perspective. And that moment really stayed with me afterwards. And I changed how I handled those things going forward. And so I think when leaders can do more of that, I think it helps them be more competitive and successful.
Yeah, I applaud the physical application of sarcasm there, whoever that guy was. I like it. It's impressive. Funnily enough, that's triggered a memory that I've probably talked about on the show before. So apologies, listeners, if you've heard this story before. But it reminds me of a very similar experience I had from the other side, where I was in a supermarket, in a store. I was looking for something. I couldn't find it. First member of staff I saw, they all wore the same uniform, same colours. So to me, the customer, they were all the same. They were there to help me. I asked, and the response was, I can't help you find anything because I work in customer service. At which point I'm like, okay, what am I? Not a customer? Turns out, no, I wasn't, because she didn't help me. I couldn't find it, so I didn't buy anything. Therefore, I wasn't a customer. So I suppose technically she was right. But
that's the kind of person I want to hug because they gave me such a great story to tell.
Yeah.
Thank you so
hindsight,
much.
Yeah,
nobody's going to believe that.
Yeah, it probably made sense in their corporate structure that I didn't understand. And I don't think this person realized how ridiculous it sounded. Yeah.
So true.
You've got to laugh. One of these things so talking about the perspectives things again, and putting yourself in other people's shoes, understanding different points of view, different perspectives, considering all the options in making a decision, for example. Quite a lot of the times, leaders will be doing these in, let's call them emotionally fraught situations where the stakes are high. Maybe the bottom line is suffering. Maybe there's like redundancies or disciplinaries, these sort of situations. And it's times like that where I think people most struggle at doing these kind of things, because you just want to get through it quickly. You don't want to make it like turn into this protracted, drawn out unpleasantness. And so you tend to just default to type sort of thing. So what's your advice for these kinds of situations to make sure that we can actually still apply these principles, we can ask ourselves the right questions, we can get those other perspectives, even when the emotions are running high?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think especially when you're working in a group, I used to work with a guy who, well, the first time he used it, we were in a meeting and we were trying to solve kind of a big issue, and everybody's throwing out all these ideas, and and everybody's feeling the pressure. And Pete, who now runs a Furniture Association. I love how he just stopped everybody and goes, I have one question. What problem are we trying to solve? And it was such a moment, right? And what you realized is that everyone in the room was not aligned on what the real problem is. And so I learned from him that day was one of the first things to do when we're under pressure is stop to ensure that we understand what problem we're trying to solve. And I think because to your point, when you're feeling the pressure, I think you have a tendency to default on the not on the true issue, but rather just on the things that we can see, right? Or the symptoms right? And so we can try to fix a symptom, but the problem is that's really not fixing it. So my advice is, if it came from Pete, was what problem are we trying to solve? And I think that is a question that can really just slow you down and make sure that you're aligned, you're making sure you're going in the right direction, but anyone you're working with is doing the same.
I think there's a double lesson in there as well about the assumptions we make in these situations. And I think the key one there being that everyone sees the situation the same way. But it is, that defaulting to type as well, I think quite often, certainly something I've done in the past, rather than looking for the quick solution, you look for the solution that you can do, whether or not it's the right one. Because you just want to help, you want to do something, you want to feel like you're moving it forwards. And so you just, sometimes that kind of that action bias goes, I guess, the opposite end of the scale to where we started with inaction, doesn't it? But
yeah, definitely. And I think as a leader, that the more you're kind of feeling that pressure, it's interesting because I think we have a tendency to kind of make a group smaller, which is fine. But actually what I want to get is I want to get more input from the people closest to the issue. And, I would say that in running a organization, one of my strengths was early on is, I was a store manager. So I was used to fixing issues on the fly. I was used to doing multiple things at once. And I was closest to the problem because I was right there. And as I grew in my role within an organization, what I learned is that I had to get more perspectives from those closest to it. Didn't mean that they were necessarily involved in the decision-making process. But sometimes when we're feeling that pressure, we have a tendency to get less input, and sometimes we need a little more input.
Oh, 100%. And that, I think, is one of the great mistakes of leadership, isn't it? When you think about it from the perspective of the people being led, I think you can very quickly see an organization that's maybe not going to do too well in the long run when people are verbally, vocally upset at the way their leadership implements things and how they never get their perspectives taken and they don't feel listened to. And it's just like these decrees from on high from people who've never worked on this production line or in this part of the office or whatever. And I think there's a lesson there that, again, a lot of leaders miss. And I don't know why, because most leaders will have started somewhere. So they should remember what that feels like, right?
Closer to the issues.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So, yeah, I don't know, short-term memory maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, right. I think sometimes it's how we view what the role is, right? And so we can view the role as we have to be in charge and be the big decision maker, or are we really the person who facilitates the right decisions? And I've always shared with some people that when we talk leadership is, I think one of my biggest shocks in moving up in an organization is that I thought I would have kind of more power. And what I really found is that I had more responsibility. But if I thought I had more power, I was then really selling the organization short.
I was going to say, I think that says a lot about the organization, actually.
That's probably more about the guy I worked for. So
well, absolutely. Yeah, I think so. We're kind of talking leadership anyway, but I do have some more leadership conceptual questions, I suppose. And the first of those,
Awesome.
we may have already covered this, so feel free to say we've already answered it, but I'll ask it anyway. From your whole career so far, what's the most important lesson that you've learned about leadership?
Yeah, I would say that probably the most important thing is the connection that I make at every opportunity. And, it's, I remember a quick story. One time I was running these retail stores, and I went and I was visiting a store, and I can even picture the exact store I was in. And then I had, some fire somewhere, probably an employee issue. And, but, I was trying to balance talking with the staff and taking care of this problem. And after I left, the store manager called me and she said, so-and-so was devastated. I'm like, what? And she goes, yeah, they're just devastated. She had all of these things she wanted to share with you. And she just didn't feel you gave her the time. Right. And so my first reaction, right, is being defensive. Well, I've got a lot of problems. I'm in charge of a lot of things. Right. But, right, I think true leadership is how I can make any person feel when I'm with them. And I think when I'm making sure that I am present, that I'm engaged, and I am listening, that, maybe sure I couldn't maybe give her an hour. But I think what she was really upset with, right, is that I just did not give her the moment that she deserved. And a lot of times we think leadership lessons, people think of the big running an organization and 5-year plan and all that. I think, real leadership happens in the moment, and I think it's won or lost right there.
I agree. I think, yeah, like the strategy, the 5-year plan, the numbers, the paperwork, all of that sort of stuff. It's important. 100% it's important. And a business that doesn't do those things isn't going to succeed. I believe those are leadership, though. I think those are more management jobs, not leadership ones.
I would agree with you.
Leadership is, like you say, it's the interactions, the connections, the day-to-day, the everyday moments, the impact you have on people, the way they feel after they've met you. It's the translating some of those other things into things that feel real for the people in the organization that they can actually achieve. But yeah, I don't think even strategy and vision, I'm on the fence about this at the moment. I go back and forth on it, but I don't feel like that's really a leadership skill. It's an important one, 100%. It's necessary. Is it leadership though? I'm not convinced.
Yeah. That could be a whole episode. And I think after an hour, we'd be like, we didn't really come to a conclusion.
Yeah, still not sure. Yeah.
Yeah. What you reminded me is that, is like that moment I had with that employee, right? I was the company. And so at that moment, right, she can't talk to the company. And right, but I was that person representing the company. And how I treated her, right? And so, right, we ask people to treat customers a certain way. Are we treating employees the same way? I heard a very simple saying once. I don't remember who said it, but I like to always say, if I don't know who said it, I said it then. But something really simple, but they said, if you want to give your employees something to smile, if you want your employees to smile, you got to give them something to smile about, right? And so how we as leaders treat people in our organization, right now there's a lot in the news about where people are having to reduce the size of their organizations because of AI and have things happening in the world. Right, you really want to see what a company really thinks of people. See how they change the workforce. That to me is so indicative of the kind of company and the kind of leader you really are.
I 100% agree. And there's two relatively recent stories that I've seen about that exact thing actually in the AI context. One of them was a company, and I won't name the names. In fact, I can't, because one of them I can't remember it. But I won't drop the names of the companies because I don't think that's fair. But there was one of them where they laid off their entire customer service department because it was an online first business and they were just going to replace them with AI chatbots. And I think within 6 months, they had to reverse that decision because, funnily enough, it turns out most humans don't like to only deal with a bot when they're having a customer service issue. They want another human at the other end of the phone or the other end of the keyboard even. And it just didn't work out for them. They were getting a lot of complaints, like all of their metrics went bad, whatever that was in that context, up or down, whichever was bad, it went that way. And then the other one was a much bigger company, like multinational one, where they were in the headlines laying off, saying it was because of AI. And it turns out it was, but not in the way everyone assumed it was. It wasn't about AI replacing jobs. It was about them freeing up budget in order to invest in the graphics cards, the processing equipment needed to run more AI, which I thought, again, I mean, it's telling, but for a different reason.
Yeah, and I think that one's even worse.
Yeah, I agree, because I don't know. Is it worse? Is it just as bad? Maybe. I don't know. But the way that everyone assumed when they said it's because of AI, that it's because all the jobs are getting replaced, I think that is an interesting, I don't know, insight perhaps into the social perception of what's going on right now. Yeah, don't know.
And I guess if I'm let go and I can't, all of a sudden my income is cut or gone, I guess the reason doesn't matter.
True.
Right. But, you'd like to be able to just, anytime you'd have to downsize, that you would do it in a way that the employee would still be a great advocate for the company. And again, I think that's the human side of it. And I think as a leader, it's important that we never, ever lose the thought that right behind every person sitting on your spreadsheet on your computer, right, is a person with a family and maybe aging parents and children. And just, I think leadership never, no matter what, loses the human element. And I think it's getting harder and harder with all this information and AI and everything out there.
Yeah, I think sometimes it is going to be inevitable. Like layoffs happen sometimes. And that's because maybe it's because 10 years ago you made the wrong decision in your financial strategy or something. But at the moment it happens, it's probably unavoidable because nobody really wants to do that. Well, maybe not nobody. The majority of people don't want to do that. But that doesn't mean that you can't do it with kindness, that you can't seek other options, other routes, that you can't try and help them make a soft landing and phone your contacts and say, I've got this amazing employee. Sadly, I've got to let go of them for whatever reason, but they'd be great for your organization. Can I introduce you? That sort of approach. And you're right. It's about the reputation of your business. Because unless you're shutting the doors completely, you still want to keep trading. You still need to have a good reputation. You're still going to need employees who want to work for you. Because people do have choices these days. Like they don't have to even be employed as much anymore. Yeah, I don't know. There's a short-sightedness.
No doubt that power has shifted.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a pendulum in the last 5 years, hasn't it? I think over COVID, it was definitely in the employee's favor. I think it's maybe swinging back the other way by now. But yeah.
When I ran this company, it was really tied to interest rates. So it was one of the few companies that when COVID hit and interest rates plummeted, their business skyrocketed. And so all of a sudden, at the start of the pandemic, I had to start hiring all these people who'd be willing to come into an office. And we were quite successful for a couple of years. And then as interest rates started going back up, I had to lay people off. Quick story, I was having someone in my office and I was laying them off. And so I grabbed a box of Kleenex and I put it between us. And she goes, "Oh, don't worry, I'll be okay." I'm like, "Well, I may not be." Right? So it's not for you.
Fair enough. Yeah.
The human side.
Yeah. I mean, it's a horrible thing to have to do, isn't it? Yeah. I think like at a more global kind of societal level, I do wonder some of these, especially like the big consumer driven organizations that are making these decisions at the moment. What do they think is going to happen if they lay off everyone, nobody can afford to buy their products? Like, it does seem short-sighted. I don't... If you replace every job with AI, assuming you could, and some of these businesses seem like they want to, how do they think people are going to earn enough money to keep them in business? I don't understand it.
That's a great question. That's a great question. Yeah.
We don't have the answer, do we?
I know we're going to have to retrain the workforce, but...
Yeah, but to do what?
To what? Right?
Yeah. Plumbing and electricians.
That's why I don't talk about AI.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. I was just about to say, right. The trades are, there are going to be certain roles that aren't going to be replaced.
Absolutely. Hopefully leadership as well.
Yeah. And we've been talking a lot, right, about the human part of it, right? I think the management piece, right, can be done. Yeah, no, I mean, gosh, I can remember trying to just put together a plan for a year and how long it would take me to type it out and, put it all in. And then, now with AI, although I'm a big believer in using multiple AIs, because, boy, if you only believe in, use one of them, I just this morning, one AI, I had to use 4 different AIs because 2 of them were arguing over the right answer. And so I had to go out to find the 2. And one was just completely wrong. I won't name which one, but
yeah,
the information was completely wrong.
I'm a little bit of a skeptic about it, I have to say. Like it definitely has its uses, but I've not reached the point yet where I was doing anything important where I would trust it.
Yeah, I will use it as a brainstorming partner.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. I guess I've had too many wrong answers from it over the years. Anyway.
Bad that in, bad that out.
Well, yeah, maybe it is my fault. That's a good point. I was asking the wrong
I really
questions.
wasn't saying that, but...
No, but it is a fair point.
Oh. Yeah. That is true. Yeah, that's an interesting... Right, sometimes the question we ask is the answer we get, and we're not always asking the right question.
Indeed. Which, of course, is a lesson not just for using AI, isn't it? So, there we go. Good, we can move away from that now.
Very true.
So, on the subject of questions, opposite one, I guess, in a way, what do you think is the most common mistake that new leaders in particular are likely to make, and how can it be avoided?
I've worked with a lot of new frontline employees, and this one sounds a little simple or you've heard before, but if I looked at everything and say, what is the one mistake that they've all made? It is thinking that they have to have the answers. And, especially with frontline managers who are new, they're fearful of showing a weakness. But, I think there's real strength in saying, well, I'm not sure. What do you think? And so, especially right in that first year or so when people move into a leadership role, it's thinking that they have to show strength when, I think showing vulnerability and empathy is an incredible leadership trait.
I agree. I think vulnerability is strength, in fact. It's in my, if I had a list like a top 10 leadership myths, that would be in like number 1 or 2 consistently, because it's so damaging to people's like mental health as well when they're in those positions and they think they have to project strength or whatever. And it goes wrong quite quickly. But I think the other reason why you shouldn't do that and why you should be, as you say, like being a bit vulnerable, asking, what do you think? How do you think we should handle this? that's such an amazing and easy way of building trust with the people that you are now leading when you're a new leader. Because that's another thing that people really worry about and struggle with at the start is, how do I get these people to trust me? Like, I've not led them before.
Right.
I'm either used to be their colleague and I've been promoted above them, or I'm new to the company as well. Either way, they've got no reason to trust me. One of the quickest ways of addressing that is ask their opinion on things, show that you trust them. So yeah, I love that example.
Yeah, and to build on that, I would say that, the one thing I always try to teach new leaders to do is ask people to bring you the answers, not the questions. And it really can free up a young leader's time, and to your point, builds that trust, because chances are you'll probably go with their answer, right? And so, and it makes them feel more valued. So, but I think a lot of times new leaders think that they have to give the answers. Sometimes just ask them to bring the answers, not the questions.
Yeah. I think it can speak volumes as well about the culture of an organization. If that's the perception of what leadership looks like, why is that? Is it because all the senior leaders, that's the way they behave as well? And then you're going into a whole sort of culture shift situation, and yeah, it gets quite difficult. Yeah.
One of the things just reminded me of, one of the ways I could judge when I ran this 100-store chain is I could tell whether the leadership or customers were more important. And how I could tell is if I was visiting a location and a customer walked in, would they walk away from me mid-sentence or not? And if they walked away mid-sentence, then they showed me that the customer was the priority. And didn't always happen. But it's a little simple, definitely a little simple thing that you could see on what they really valued inside that location.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a good test. Same for like answering the phones, I guess, if you're in an office or, yeah, interesting.
Right.
Cool. Okay. So this question you may struggle with. I don't know. Some people find this a tough one.
Oh.
But I do get some genuinely...
I'm up for it.
Get some genuinely uplifting answers to this one, so I keep asking it. What is your best memory of being led?
It's, and I'll say it's a story that I tell quite often, but it was so important is, I was working in a Sharper Image store. It was Christmas Eve, and my manager was so excited because he had people in town, and he kept talking about this lobster dinner that they were going to have that night. And all he talked about, and he said, "Buddy, I can't wait to have that dinner, buddy. Lobster tonight, buddy." And and so when I was closing out the register that night, they had sent out instructions in the morning that said, whatever you do, don't reboot in the middle of it. And what did I do? But I rebooted because I thought it was stuck. And so it had wiped out the entire day's sales. And so I had to go to him and say, Keith, I really screwed up. Looks like your lobster dinner. I'll stay and do it myself. And he was like, no, buddy, we got it. And when we were leaving, I said to him, why were you not upset? He said, well, buddy, the first mistake is always on me. And it was the simplest little leadership lesson. But, and I will tell you, that was probably 30 some years ago. And it's probably the most valuable lesson I learned in leadership. Let the first mistake be on you, not the employee.
That is very cool, I have to say. And so nicely expressed as well.
Buddy.
Yeah, well, that too. But just, such sticks in your memory, and I can see why it's stuck with you for 30 years.
And I would tell you, there were so many times, that, when someone messed up, I just wanted, blow the whole thing up. And I would just hear, buddy, that mistake. And he did the grace that he showed was incredible, but it was such a teachable moment. And as a leader, right? I already felt bad bringing it to him. He could have just made me feel worse.
Uh-huh.
And instead, he owned it. But that second part he said was so important. The next one's on you. So,
Okay.
he's telling me, don't do it again. Don't make a mistake again.
Yeah, I think it speaks to so many of the fundamentals of leadership as well, doesn't it? This story, like the whole, like how you deal with mistakes, the way you react, what people will remember about how you handle that. It's so important. And so one of the principles that's always been really important to me as a leader has been this idea that if things go wrong, if people make mistakes, even if they screw up through negligence or whatever, praise in public, reprimand, don't like that word, but deal with the bad stuff in private. And I think that's something that's always stood me in quite good stead, because it's almost like the other side of the coin as well for the role of a leader in these situations is you give credit to others and then you take blame for yourself. I think these are all kind of common themes, similar ideas, but it's about how you leave people feeling at the end of the working day, isn't it? And whether they feel like they're supported and valued, or whether they're just being used as a scapegoat, etc. And I think that does have an impact. It sets the culture of your team. And too many people, I think, maybe it's tied to confidence. And I think that's why so many new leaders struggle with these things in particular. If you're already lacking confidence, you may be feeling a bit impostery, you're worried you might lose your job, then of course, naturally, you're going to react badly when something goes wrong. And we've all done that. I definitely did that in my first manager job. And it was because of confidence, because you're like, oh God, like my boss is going to come down on me like a ton of bricks because of this. And it's like that fight or flight response almost.
And I think the other lesson for me in there is that we have a tendency, right? Almost all reactions are from our personal perspective, right? So his reaction could, and so many leaders' reactions is how it's going to impact me, right? But instead, right, he didn't do that. And I think so as a leader, when something does happen, is not to internalize what is the personal impact, but what is the organizational and what is the employee impact. Those are more important than the impact on me. But that's not human nature. The human nature is to react based on our own personal perspective.
It is. I think that's a learned behavior, though, that leaders need to learn quickly, because you're absolutely right. Like, and it stands in opposition to what leadership is about, or what it should be about, which is others, not yourself. I think people who learn that quickly end up being really great leaders. People who don't probably, might be unfair, but probably turn into those toxic bosses that we all hate working for.
Maybe we just uncovered the first sign.
Potentially. I'll write that down on my ever-growing list of red flags. Yeah.
Right. Well, and back to the power of the pause, right? Because I think it is a natural reaction, right? Is how someone's going to impact you. But if you can just pause and change the perspective on it, I think you have an opportunity to not only be a better leader, but to be a better coach and ultimately a better organization.
Yeah. And I think that the reaction to the selfish reaction, I suppose, I think, like, on reflection, that's why I've linked this to confidence, because I think the confident leaders in those situations are able to kind of, even if they're thinking of it in terms of how it's going to impact them, they're able to say, okay, that's going to impact me, but it doesn't matter. I can take that. I've got the confidence. I've got the experience, whatever. I can deal with it. It's not a problem. This person here who's made the mistake and is sweating right now and stressed out, let's do the best for them.
So true.
So 2 more questions for you. This first one, it's summing up everything we've talked about, really, I think. So in your opinion, why is leading with integrity and putting these people first always going to be the way to win in the long run?
One of the things that drew me to this podcast is, the word integrity. It can be one of those words like, yes. And then until all of a sudden you're like, Oh, right. Yeah. Is that true integrity? And again, a little bit of a simple, right? But right, leaders do what they ask others to do. Leaders do what they say they will do, and ultimately, I think one of the things that always bothered me the most is when you see a leader. And I had one who actually worked for me once, right? He believed, right, the old theory that, right, um, that that authority has its perks, it has its difference, and so, and we're using that example of like answering the phone or walking up to the customer, right? Integrity is everything you say we're going to do, your employees see you doing. And so, again, I'll come back to true leadership. I love it. 5-year plans, management, and even the vision of where we're going. But ultimate leadership is determined on a daily basis, what you say and what you do. And it's as simple as that.
Yeah, I agree, obviously. Yeah, I think that kind of old school leadership approach that isn't really leadership, but people said it was back in the day kind of thing. Even early in my career, which, it doesn't feel that long ago, but I suppose it was for a lot of listeners now. It was still a thing. Well, I remember phrases exactly like that, like, I'm the boss, I don't make the tea, that sort of idea. And there was this, what was it? There was an acronym that used to go around. Rank has its privileges, RHIP. That was the one we used to get thrown at us constantly when the boss didn't want to do something. And it's so corrosive, I think, to like the culture of your team, the collaboration, the level of trust, and definitely the level of respect that people hold for you as their leader. All of which, like we know by now, are essential if you want to be successful in that kind of role. And I think this is why these old school managers, old school bosses, I think they're not long for this world, or at least not long for this workplace. Let's put it nicely. Yeah.
Yeah, I worked one time with a retailer that had like a cooking area, and the guy running in the whole food area, he was just terrible to his employees. And I said, well, you know better than that. Why are you doing that? He says, oh, because that's what was done to me. Right. And so that's not going to work anymore. To your point earlier, the power has shifted. But even if the power hadn't shifted, the right thing is still be the kind of leader that others admire and want to be.
100%. Now, I will just caveat and say I'm not claiming to be perfect on this, but I think there is something else that's important here, is adaptability, changing with the times and applying the lessons you learn. Because there are parts of that we've talked about here, and I'm sure the same is probably true for you, where we're railing against things being done the wrong way, but we probably did those ourselves back in the day because, as you've just said, that's the way it was done. But I think the important thing is, once you realize it doesn't work and or it's not the right thing to do, you stop doing it. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think you have to question yourself, right? I mean, I think
absolutely.
I had a guy who used to always say, he'd talk about a manager or a leader, he'd say, right, he says, well, the problem is that person believes their own press clippings. And so, right. And so I think you have to constantly question yourself. Am I really the person I say that I am?
Yeah.
And there's always going to be a little bit of a gap because we're human.
Of course.
But keep that gap narrow. You'll keep that gap narrow just by questioning yourself on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. The power of self-reflection is not to be underestimated, I think. Not just for leadership either. But yeah. Lovely. Well, keeping on the time, last question. This is my favorite question. It is leadership heroes.
Leadership heroes.
So, Doug, if you had to pick one person, but it can be anyone you can think of pretty much, they could be alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, but someone who, in your opinion, would perfectly embody leadership. So who would that be for you and why?
Well, I'm going to have to just pick someone I worked for, so it's not going to be any famous person or someone. But, when I worked for a gentleman by the name of David Wood, and, if I had to say the one thing he really embodied is he believed in me before I even believed in myself. And I think that can be such a great leadership quality. And I was able to repay that with other people that have worked for me along the way, that sometimes their own stories, their own past, things that stood in the way of them reaching their potential. And I'm sitting here today because, I wouldn't say, I know it's because the opportunity he gave me, but the opportunity he gave me was because of the belief that I could, what he showed me. And so only a number of people have had the opportunity to work for this gentleman, but he just taught me so much about what true leadership is.
And I think those are the more meaningful choices. Plus, it's an easy way to get the bonus points because no one else will have chosen them before. So
it'd be funny if someone had. I'd be like, whoa.
Yeah, I mean, small world, It could happen eventually. Yeah.
Yeah.
I always really like the choices for this question where it's someone that you've personally encountered, you've experienced their leadership. So I think then it's a more informed choice going. So it's a callback to what we were talking about earlier, isn't it? But you can actually speak from a position of knowledge and authority because you've experienced their leadership, you know what it felt like. And I think that makes it, as I say, a more meaningful choice. I also think like a common theme that's starting to emerge when people do answer it with like a former boss or something like that is that phrase you mentioned that I've heard several times now, and I think it's a real lesson here, is that belief. They believed in me before I believed in myself, or they pushed me out of my comfort zone, or they had confidence in me when I didn't have it in myself, variations on that theme. And I think there's a real nugget there about what really great leadership looks like and feels like.
No doubt. And I think that's a trait that is, far beyond business, right? With our children, with people that we engage with, is sometimes it's hard for people to see what you see in them. So don't keep it a secret. Make sure you share it.
Yeah, it's back to perspective again, isn't it? It's another recurring theme today.
It all comes back to perspective.
Well, Doug, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for being with us today. Final small thing I will ask you is if anyone in the audience wants to know more about you, perhaps get a copy of one of these books, where's the best place for them to go and do so?
Yeah, please go to startwithwhatif.com. And if you'll go to that page, you'll get a 44-page excerpt. So I give you the entire framework. As I said, right, the real framework is only a couple chapters. So I want everyone to have the framework at no cost. And then there's also sample questions in there and sample ways to apply it. But it's about 20% of the book at no charge. And you can just download it into however you want, PDF, digital, Kindle, you name it. So go to startwithwhatif.com, get a free excerpt. And then if you like it, go ahead and sign up for my newsletter. And I run a program called The Better Leader Now, which is also a leadership piece, or again, my book, Start With What If.
Awesome. Well, we'll pop those links down in the show notes as well, so everyone can find that easily. And that's all we've got time for. Thank you again, Doug, for your time, for your conversation, for your insight today. It's been great meeting you and having you on the show.
Thank you. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise. Doug, thank you again for your time today. Some great stories, well told there, and a really useful tool as well in the what if rule. Listener or viewer, thank you to you as well for being with us today and supporting the podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Doug, then I do encourage you, hit that link down there in the show notes, get a copy of his book if you can, and start applying that question action framework that Doug has talked about today. That's all from me for this episode. Join us again next week for another awesome leadership chat with firefighter, paramedic, and author Mark Andrew. We'll be talking about leadership presence, the pitfalls of micromanagement and control, and what real leadership in high-stress environments actually looks like. So don't miss that one. Hope you'll be there. And until then, as I say every week, be a leader, not a boss.